Hi, I'm Ken Mosesian, and I want to personally thank you for picking up a copy of my book, The Power of Promise: How to Win and Keep Customers by Telling the Truth About Your Brand. Over the next half hour, we're going to talk about 5 key steps that are outlined in the book: understanding what brand is, declaring your own brand, mapping the ideal customer journey, training your team, and finally, delivering the promise of your brand. As important as all of this is to your business, what's even more important to me is the concept of personal integrity. I'm an imperfect spokesman for this, but I hope that what this book starts is a movement, that truth matters, that your word is your bond, and that integrity, above all, is the most important quality that we can have in our lives. Again, thank you for picking up a copy of the book. I hope you have enjoyed it or are enjoying it, and I hope you enjoy the next half hour to come. The first thing we're going to talk about is understanding brand and customer experience. And from my perspective, brand is your promise to your customer. Your brand is the thing that your customer can count on you for. And the customer's experience of your brand, well, that's the test of whether or not you're telling the truth. If your customer's experience is that you are telling the truth, then your brand is enhanced. If your customer's experience is that you're not telling the truth, then your brand is degraded. And success or failure can hinge on that. Here's the great news. By going through these 5 steps, you have an opportunity to set yourself up for great success. When you think about brand in terms of promise, you have to think about integrity, and you have to think about your word as your bond. And I'm reminded of a story my dad told me about when he was growing up as a kid. He grew up on a farm, and his dad did business with a lot of different vendors for fertilizer or for feed for the livestock, for the price that they were ultimately going to get at the time of harvest. Not once did my grandfather ever sign a contract. My dad said, your word was your bond at that time. If you agreed upon a particular price for the feed for the horses, say, well, that's the price you got. You shook your hands, and that was it, because you gave your word. It was literally that important. Your word was more important than a piece of paper. I have no illusion that we're going to go back completely to that time, but wouldn't it be an amazing step forward if we actually could get to a place where your word is your bond, and the contract was simply the legal formality that you had to go through? If you can think of brand from that perspective, you're going to be in great shape. Recognize too that every time a customer touches your company, no matter what it is, whether they're seeing an advertisement, or whether they're talking to you in person, or whether they're chatting with you, or whether they're exchanging an email with you, every single touch point they have, that's an opportunity for them to judge this question. Are you telling the truth about your brand, or are you not? And that is where the difference gets made. Did you tell the truth, or didn't you? And it's not just the final product. It's everything along the way, and it's everything after the sale. What if something goes wrong? What's the experience of calling back in and saying, the product's not working? What's the experience of saying, I'd like to exchange this? What's the experience of asking, can I have a refund? What are your policies around that? How does all of that get delivered in such a way that integrity always lives through every single experience that a customer is having of your brand? If you can start with that, if integrity is your watchword as you're moving through this process, you're going to be in great shape. Finally, details matter. We'll talk about this more in the next section, but the things that may not seem important truly are. Because if you can't be trusted with small matters, how can you be trusted with larger ones? Customers know this. Human beings inherently know this. It's those little things that we notice in our relationships. And let's be clear, this is about relationship. Business is ultimately about relationship. And if you take it on from that perspective, if you understand brand from the perspective of emotion, and experience, if you understand that brand isn't so much about reading a textbook and knowing it, but it's about the emotion that you want to evoke in your customers, man, you're going to be in great, great shape. So think about that. What's your promise? How are you going to make sure that you're delivering experiences that are extraordinary and that fulfill on that promise? What emotions do you want to evoke? What emotions do you want to evoke in your customers such that they feel your brand? They may not know it intellectually, but they know how they feel when they experience it. Pay attention to those things as we're walking through these next steps, and you will be in great shape. Up next, declaring your own brand. Declaring your own brand. What is the specific promise that you are going to make to your customers? Before we talk about that, I want to talk about the fact that details matter. This is really important to keep in mind as you start thinking about your own promise and you think about touch points and the fact that all of them, the great and the small, really make a difference. In a recent survey that was done of airline passengers, they were asked multiple questions, but two important ones in my mind. They were asked about the airworthiness of the aircraft, and they were asked about the competence of the pilots. There was one variable, and that was whether or not there was a ring of coffee on the tray table that pulls down from the seat in front of you. At a statistically significant level, the passengers that had a coffee ring stain on that tray table rated the airworthiness of the aircraft and the competence of the pilots lower than those who had clean tray tables. I'm a frequent flyer. I don't often think about that stuff. I carry wipes with me and wipe them off. But what it meant in the minds of those people who evaluated the airworthiness and the competence to be lower was this: if you can't be trusted in small things, if we can't trust you to clean a tray table, how can we trust you to maintain a complex jet engine? How can we trust you to train a pilot to fly us at 550 miles an hour, 35,000 feet in the air, if you can't wipe down a tray table? Details matter. Keep that in mind as we're walking through these exercises. Most importantly, in terms of foundational items, is your vision. What is your vision for your company? And your vision, very different than your mission. The vision is something bigger than you. It's bigger than your whole team together. It's something that if you're really thinking in true visionary terms, it's going to outlive you. It will never be accomplished in your lifetime. A vision is inspiring. It invites you to step in. People want to be a part of it. They feel called to it. It's very different than being motivated. I think of motivation from the perspective of a Marine drill sergeant barking at me to run up a hill. And I think of inspiration as my friend standing at the top of the hill, beckoning me up, telling me that if I can make it to the top, I'm going to have a better experience than I ever would have if I had stayed at the bottom. Vision inspires. Meaningful visions for companies, they also engage. They engage employees. In fact, companies whose employees were not moved by their vision, they had an engagement of around 14 or 15%. If they found it to be a somewhat engaging vision statement, around 40%. And if they found the vision statement to be truly engaging, it was closer to 70%. And what I mean by engagement is as follows. Employees that don't just show up at 9 and leave at 5. They show up early. They stay late. They go the extra mile. They come to you with ideas. They're creative. They take 100% responsibility for what's happening at the company because they are engaged, because they are inspired, because they see a vision that calls them to something bigger than themselves. Spend the time to create a good vision statement. A strategy matters. Companies with strategic plans actually do better than companies without a strategic plan. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. There's a reason it's a cliche, and it's worth paying attention to. Finally, when you get down to defining what your promise is, know that you don't have to talk directly about your product or your service in that promise, in defining your brand. By way of example, Coca-Cola talks about inspiring moments of optimism and uplift. They talk about what they hope to create around enjoying one of their cold beverages. Coors Light, on the other hand, talks about being the world's most refreshing beer. It's clear, it's powerful, it talks directly about the product. Both of them are equally as good. They simply take it from a different tact, and you can take it from anyone you want to. Think about what's going to be most powerful and meaningful to you, and beyond that, think about what you're going to be able to fulfill on in the best possible way. Up next, mapping the customer experience journey. Mapping the ideal customer experience journey. I recommend when you take this on that you have some fun with it. Get a great big whiteboard or get a bunch of giant Post-it notes that you can stick up all around the room. Bring your team together. Bring key stakeholders in if you can. And talk about the journey that you want your customers to have. What's the experience you want them to have such that the emotion that you want to evoke will be brought up? That's really the key. What journey do you want them to have that's going to evoke the desired emotion? Because brand, as we talked about, is both emotional and experiential. I'll tell you a little story that I had about a medical procedure, and it was my colonoscopy, and it was terrifying me, and I kept putting it off year after year after year because cancer runs in my family, and ignorance is bliss. Even though I had worked in the medical field years before, and I knew that earlier is better, that time is not your friend when it comes to disease, I still avoided it until my doctor told me he was going to discharge me from his medical care because I was ignoring his medical advice. And so he gave me a list of preferred providers. I looked at the list, checked a few of them out online, and there was one that just stood out for me because it calmed me. It actually made me feel some relief around this. And when I called them, the experience that I had on the phone was so far above and beyond the normal office experience that I was used to having that I knew I had found the right place. The person on the phone told me exactly what the procedure was going to entail. She gave me a high-level overview so I didn't have to digest too much information all at once. There was an online portal I could go to fill out information so everything was done in advance. She promised me that she would check in with me at each step to make sure I didn't have any questions, or if I did, that they got answered. And she followed through on what she said she would do. She kept her word. Because right there I was testing the brand, whether I knew it or not in the moment. And I probably didn't consciously know it because I was feeling so much anxiety about the thought of maybe finding out that I actually had cancer. I was still testing the brand, and it passed with flying colors. And when I got to the office, it was that same high-level VIP experience. I was immediately taken in. They honored the start times that they had. Everything that happened, every single person that I came in contact with knew me by name. They told me exactly what they were going to do. They did it, and then they told me what was going to happen next. So in this map, think about transitions as well. And in the book, The Power of Promise, How to Win and Keep Customers by Telling the Truth About Your Brand, I spend a great deal of time talking about these transition points. How do people get handed off from one professional to the next if you're dealing in a professional services firm? This is incredibly important, so someone's not left hanging wondering what's going to happen next. It's so worth your time to do this. What constitutes a touch point? A touch point is any and every place that a customer has to interact with your brand. This could be an advertisement that they see in a magazine, online, on social media. It could be a phone call that they make, or a chat session that they engage. It could be an email exchange or walking into your brick and mortar store. It could be any and all of those things. So every time there is a touch point, there's an opportunity and there's a danger. The opportunity is that the person will have an opportunity to evaluate your brand positively, and the danger is that you won't pay as much attention because perhaps you think it's a small detail and it doesn't matter, but we know details actually do matter. They're important. Pay attention to every single touch point as you map this. Look for wow moments. What are times where you can do something that's unexpected that will actually stick with your customer because you want to move them up that customer experience ladder. You want to ultimately get them to the point of being an advocate for your brand, because a customer who's an advocate for your brand will be worth far more to you than any kind of advertising that you could buy. I invite you to take some time with this, have a great deal of fun with it, because this is the key to your success. Up next, training your team. Fourth step, training your team. I'm going to start with a story on this one as well. Last week I was at a well-known restaurant here in the Phoenix and Scottsdale area, and I walked up to the counter. There's an area where you can just buy things to go, and I wanted to grab something to go. And I stood there while two people behind the counter were just talking with each other. And one of the other employees who was at another station looked over and said to their team members, "Has he been helped?" I'm standing right there. Has he been helped? And their response directly back to her, again, while I'm standing right there, was, "Yeah, he's been helped." To which I said, "Have I?" To which she responded, "I don't know, have you?" To which I responded, "No, I haven't." "Oh, what can I help you with?" It was horrible. Now, it's first world Phoenix, Scottsdale horrible, let's get clear. This is not horrible, you're going to lose your life horrible. But it impacted my thought about that brand. It impacted how I felt about that particular restaurant, which is a shame because they have a really good product and I've had a ton of great experiences there. And it just reminded me of two things. Number one, like a grade point average, man, it's hard to get up to that 4.0, but it is so easy to slip. One bad grade, a B or God forbid a C, and all of a sudden, boom, you're down and you got to work it back up again. And so all of these things matter. Now, in the process of that experience, I thought about the training piece, and I wondered, has that staff been trained? Do they actually know what an extraordinary customer experience looks like and sounds like, and what it feels like to actually have one yourself? This is a great exercise to do with your own team, to talk to them about whatever your product or service is and imagine yourself in the role of a satisfied customer. What does it feel like to have had that product or service delivered beautifully? What does the exchange look like if you have a brick and mortar business? What does that exchange personally look like, and what does it sound like? If you talk to people on the phone, what does it sound like? If you interact with people via email, what have you done, or via chat, what have you done to make that experience as personable and intimate and efficient as you can so people feel like they're being communicated with and that they're being communicated with well and they leave feeling good? I've had those experiences. It's weird to say that you can have a great experience via a chat exchange with a really well-trained team member, with somebody who knows what they're doing, and they're able to actually put some nuance into the language that they use. That's phenomenal, and you can tell it when you come across it. It is worth the time to train. Now, I always start with this. What does it look like, sound like, and feel like if somebody has an extraordinary experience? Your team needs to know that. They need to know it experientially, and that's why role play is really important. And role play it on both sides. What is it when it's a great experience? What is it when it's a not great experience? What do both those things look like and sound like and feel like? Go ahead and take some time and help them with conflict resolution. What happens if things go off the rail? What do you do with it? And I would also say, and some companies are particularly great at this, they empower their employees to know that there are certain things that they can do without having to talk to a manager. They know that, let's just say by way of example, they have up to a $100 credit that they could extend to a customer to make a bad experience a good one. Because those things are going to happen. The question is, how are you going to redeem them when they do? Make sure your team knows what the parameters are and that they're empowered to be able to carry it out without having to ask you. It's important that you observe in the field when this is happening. And by in the field, I mean wherever that happens to be, whether it's on the phone, on a keyboard, or in person. And that when things go wrong or go right, you share it with the team, because just as you want to be able to correct when things go wrong, you want to be able to replicate success. And finally, 100% responsibility. If you can instill this in your team, not that they have to do everything, but that they literally feel a sense of shared responsibility for everything going on, such that they feel also empowered to call out when something's going wrong. And in doing so, be able to correct it as quickly as possible. Finally, we're going to talk about delivering the best experience that you possibly can to your customer. Finally, we talk about delivering the promise of your brand. And if you've followed these steps along to understand what brand and customer experience is, to declare your own brand, to map the customer experience journey, to train your team, when you get ready to deliver, you're going to have the best possible experience that you could. Now, once you deliver your product, your service, or if this is an entrepreneurial venture and you're delivering this brand new company into the wild, as I call it, for the first time, it can be a little scary. But I promise you, having done all these things will make all the difference in the world. Now, the interesting thing is, you may have been the creator of your brand, and you will always be the creator of it. But once it's out there, it now lives in the minds of your prospects and your customers. It lives in their hearts. It lives in their emotions. Your brand, in a way now, belongs to them. They're going to tell you whether or not you're actually delivering the promise of your brand, and they're actually going to tell you whether or not that promise is accurate. So it's really important to find out whether or not everything is landing the way you intended it to. How do you know that? You have to ask. You actually have to ask your customers. You have to ask your current customers. You have to ask your former customers who may have purchased once and then left. You have to ask your team members. You have to ask your prospects. How is this landing for you? And then you have to make course corrections that you push out to the entire team. There is a dear friend of mine who, when she was 5 years old, went to Disneyland. She has a brother who's a sweet guy, and he's a special needs kid. And this was, 30 years ago. They went there, and not really knowing what to expect, were blown away that the team members at Disneyland showed her brother such care and love and compassion every single step of the way. When she recounts the story now, she chokes up and starts crying. And this is something that happened decades ago. That is the power of a brand. When people focus on the emotion that they want to evoke and they deliver it meticulously across each and every touch point. And you can bet they are constantly assessing whether or not the brand, the Disney brand, is landing the way they want it to. They are constantly course correcting. They are constantly pushing that information out to their team so that each and every teammate knows, really knows, what they need to do to make sure that that Disney brand stays as true and authentic as it possibly can. They understand that's why there is so much training that goes on in advance of and constantly through an employee's life at Disney. Finally, I would say we are collectors of experiences, human beings. We're collectors of experiences. Ultimately, the things that we recount in life are stories. We don't talk about our possessions in the same way that we talk about the experiences that we had. That beautiful glass of wine that we shared with our spouse at that one sunset, or the beautiful morning run that we took by ourselves that just cleared our head and gave us a great sense of purpose and helped us understand what we're really here for and what we're doing. We collect experiences throughout life. And if you can tie what you do as a brand into that, if you understand that you're not selling a computer or a sandwich or a particular service, you're selling the totality of the experience that goes with it, then you're going to set yourself so far ahead of the pack that you'll really set yourself up for a great, successful run. We're collectors of experiences. What kind of an experience are you creating for your customers such that they'll be talking about you long after that purchase is done, and that they'll be an advocate for your company and bring others in to have that same kind of an experience because it was so meaningful to them. We are all in the hospitality business. No matter what your particular industry is, all of us are in the hospitality business. Your customer is your guest. What are you doing to care for them and to wow them such that you'll be the only logical choice next time that they need your product or your service?